All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chaplain Herb Lemke, and I have with me Chaplain Brian Osborne. I am the Family Life Chaplain over at 593rd ESC, and I will let Brian go ahead and introduce himself to you so you can know where he works.
Hi, I'm Brian Osborne. I'm the Joint Base Lewis McChord Chaplain Family Life Chaplain. I work out over at Four Chaplains Memorial Chapel, which is at 9120 Transmission Line Road, right down from Madigan. So I work for the garrison, and we have a counseling center there, and also provide training for unit chaplains. So I'm sure we can tell you more about that as we go along.
And what today is for us, the block of instruction that we're going to kind of cover for you is probably something that's not foreign to many of you. It's an overview of Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages. It's personally one of my favorite to do at some of these strong bonds that chaplains are most often affiliated with, simply because it leaves room for a lot of attention that the couples need in that moment. And by that, I mean, we all know the basic idea of what words of affirmation may mean to us, but what does it mean to our spouse? And so that's one thing that I want to challenge as we go through some of the basic principles today, is ask the hard question. If my spouse is big on quality time, what is that to my spouse? Is it simply holding the hand when we go grocery shopping? Is it more of a hug when I come home from a hard day's work? Some of those factors. So that's kind of the direction we're going to go. Both Brian and I come from a option within the chaplain corps where we were selected to go to family life school. So we have a counseling background, earned a master's in counseling, and both of us are pursuing licensure. I have mine in the state of Washington, and Brian is getting ready to take the test to start his as well. So if we can be a resource, definitely don't hesitate to find out how to get a hold of us, those kind of things. As we move forward, there's going to be enough of us on this session that there's a lot of moving pieces to manage. So if you would raise your hand, and this is going to be kind of the interesting part, at the very top of your screen, if you're unfamiliar with this, there is simply a hand up in the corner. What I would encourage you to do is, if you have a question, just click on that, and we will watch for that hand to appear and go to you directly. Okay, so at this time, is there any questions, anything that you want to bring up for the betterment of the group? Okay, hearing none, I'm gonna let Brian kind of kick things off. I kind of threw him a curveball because we've got a lot joining in the group, and I'm going to go ahead and start accepting a lot of people that are coming in right now. So Brian, if you would go ahead and start our discussion with the 5 love languages.
All right. Well, it's great to be a part of this forum today, and to share something that we use often in counseling. And but the 5 love languages, I'm sure many of us have heard this. We maybe have read the book, or maybe we haven't, and maybe we're here to learn more about how we can use this in our own relationship, or use it to encourage others in our formation or organization to enhance our personal relationships outside of work. So the 5 love languages is a key part of that. Everybody has a language they speak in receiving love, and so usually we are well versed in sharing that. So, for instance, my love language is touch, and so I like physical touch. I like to be close to my wife. I like to be close to my kids. And so that's how I express my love, and I like for them to do that back to me. So when they don't do that back to me, it often, if I'm not aware, it can send me a message like, well, why don't they love me? And so part of this journey in the 5 love languages, not only learning about what your spouse speaks or your partner, but also learning when that love is not coming back to us, not necessarily bristling or getting upset, because more than likely our partner is sharing their love language towards us, and it may not be our love language. So hopefully that makes sense so far. I know you're kind of dual tasked right now, so it's having an awareness of yourself, and having an awareness of the other, and so when we aren't receiving the love that we need, so if I'm not receiving touch and I'm not getting a hug from my kids when I come home, and that I don't sit back and say, well, gosh, they must really hate me, but it's taking a look back and saying, oh, well, they're busy, they're doing online school right now, they're doing homework, and so but also learning the love language, not only or of my kids as well, and my wife, and so that when I see them, if I know what their love language is, to be able to connect with them speaking their language. So it's definitely a means of connection, a means of bonding, and a means of enhancing our relationships. So.
All right, appreciate it, Brian. Want to start things off with a quote. I'm unsure at this time if you're able to see my slides. I was sharing it, and then all of a sudden, as it started to record, we kind of lost the slides without me changing anything. So if you have a chat bar, feel free to send me a note saying you're not able to see it, and we'll work that too. But the quote is simply this: if we agree that the word love permeates human society, those that are around us, both historically and in the present, we must also agree that it is the most confusing word. And I'm fascinated by that quote for several reasons. When you really think about it, how does the other person, let's say in your relationship, understand and conceptualize love? I know when I was growing up, for example, love was like this sacred word. Had parents that was very close to, and there was no issue saying, I love you, Mom, I love you, Dad. But then I meet this wonderful lady that later became my wife, and she tells her best friend she loves them. And so the idea of love began to be challenged for me. What is that? And so again, I'm going to read it, and I challenge you just to really reflect on that, and maybe in the moments that you have with your spouse, see how they understand what love is. Challenge them to think about how they might conceptualize the word love. Again, it says, if we agree that the word love permeates human society, both historically and in the present, we must also agree that it is a most confusing word. So that's just kind of just to get us rolling, because we haven't even touched the languages yet, and we're not going to for just a second. For discussion purposes, why did you fall in love with your spouse? For myself, I met my wife when I was working at McDonald's, of all places, and fell in love at McDonald's. I've never, until of late, spent much time saying, why did I fall in love with her? And a key there is not only the why, but the word love. What does love mean? I don't know, Brian, you got thoughts on that as well?
What does love mean?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had a little moment, and maybe you all are having those moments too out there. I was thinking about when I met my wife, and what love meant to me then in that moment. So maybe you're having those kind of thoughts as Herb was talking, but yeah. So what does love mean? Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has so many diverse meanings to each one of us. It's informed by our background. And when Herb mentioned something about his family, I know my family, we said, I love you before we went to bed. And but never were we aware of love languages and how we communicated that to each other. And I kind of wonder now what difference that would make today in my upbringing, how that would maybe bring us closer together. But yeah, love is a deep experience. It's a transformative experience. It can be overwhelming in the moment, but as time goes on and that relationship continues over time, sometimes those same feelings that were there at the very beginning begin to kind of wane as responsibilities increase, and life takes a different path when children show up in these transitional moments that impact that original couple relationship. So yeah, what is love, and what does love really mean, and how are we bonding together?
Thanks, Brian. And I guess some of you may be starting to ask, well, I thought we were going to talk about the 5 love languages, and we're going to get there, I promise you. But key to the 5 love languages is being willing to try to understand and define and communicate how we see love. A couple of things to think about if your spouse is sitting there with you. We called it a moment to reminisce, if you will. And these are simply statements. The first time I saw you, blank. For myself, when I saw my wife for the first time, I don't know that I'd ever experienced butterflies before. So in the scheme of things, you know, what happened that first time? And I see the hands raised, so give me just 1 second and I will get there. And then on the second thought, on our first date, you blank. Now, you know, that could be as simple as you open the car door for me, and ever since then, you've never done that. I don't know. But what are those moments that take us back? And do we ever think about those things and go back? So ponder that for just a second. I'm going to jump over here and figure out how to get to this hand. If you want, go ahead and unmute your mic and go ahead with your question.
Hey, Chaplain, it's Leslie Thomas with DPFR Marketing. I'm here to run your slides if you would like.
Okay, thank you. Do you already have them where you can push them up? I attached them in the day 1 notes as well as I had them uploaded.
I do. I'm about to share my screen.
All right, Leslie, we're already jumped over to, just so you know, we're at big idea number 1. Thank you for saving my day right there. All right, so we've got big idea number 1, as you guys can see in front of you now. There is an emotional love tank in all of us needing to be filled. And to be honest with you, this is a term that Gary Chapman has come up with, and he has coined, and we hear it quite a bit. From my foxhole, if you will, I want you to think about this of, if we want to grow in a relationship, what am I doing for my spouse? What am I doing that speaks their love language? And what are they doing that speaks my love language, so that we both can be content in our relationship and committed in our relationship? So that's important, because call it whatever you want. If you like Love Tank, go with that. If you want coins in the cash register, whatever the case may be, what are you doing to invest in the spouse that you say you want to spend the rest of your world and your life with? So there's an emotional love tank in all of us. That's his first big idea. Second big idea is that there's a difference between falling in love and loving behavior. There's a difference between falling in love and loving behavior. If you're like me, that can be somewhat challenging, because we watch a lot of TV and we hear this idea of being in love. But this goes back to that initial question about reminiscing. When I think about that first date, what is it that engaged me in my case to ask my wife out? What's going on there? And just really connecting and reminiscing with who she was and who I thought we could be together, and what was I willing to do to develop a relationship. One of my favorite things that comes up quite often in the counseling I do, being of the Protestant background, the idea, there's a verse that reference when 2 people get together, it's the idea of 2 becoming 1. And so I often visualize it for myself, where I need to make sure I'm leaning into my spouse, but I'm hoping and praying, if you will, that she's doing some things to lean into me, so that together we can grow into this new chapter of what tomorrow may look like, totally different of what her family was and what my family was, but in the direction we feel called to jump into. So if you will, the next slide really hits on discovering your love language. What makes you feel most loved by your spouse? So we're setting the conditions to hit this love language. That's all that's going on right now. What makes you feel most loved by your spouse? My wife spoils me, and this is not at all something that will work in every household, but she does a great job of when I get home, I get that time to put on blue jeans and a t-shirt and become her, become husband, become dad. I don't take an hour, I don't take 4 hours, I don't go play video games, because when I come down and give her that hug and a kiss, she's usually got dinner ready. So she's speaking my love language right there, and we start conversing about our day. Um, but it's that piece that when she gives me that few moments to shut work off or change modes, that just makes my day and makes me more present with her the rest of the evening. Next thing there on the slide says, what have I most often requested of my spouse? What is it that when you think about what your spouse does, what is it that you ask her to do most often for you? I'm being very figurative here, but is it very important to you that the spouse take the trash out? I don't know. What is it you really think you need them to do? Um, that's just an example of what we'll see in a minute of acts of service. It's not about the trash, it's what we're asking them to do, okay? And then the third bullet there, how do I most often express love to my spouse? So we've talked a lot about the doing and the feeling, but there's a piece that we've got to play in this too. How is it that I'm expressing my love for them? It's not necessarily a healthy relationship when it's one party doing all the work. Brian and I have seen couples in the past that is um, a common thing that can create some disharmony within the relationship where one feels like they're doing all of it. And it's very important to get on the same page and learn that love language so that they can have a healthy conversation about what's important for them as a couple. If you will, the next slide is just quickly a filler for, doing the love language quiz. I want to tell you again, if you have just come on, some of you can see it attached in the notes, some of you cannot. You can go to the number 5 and then lovelanguages.com. That is 5lovelanguage.com. That's their website, and you can go straight to the quiz and take the quiz. And the beauty of doing it that way is that you can, if you have kiddos, you can do the quiz for the kids. If you're single, you can do the quiz as a single and not feel like you're getting singled out, if you will. It's catered to all the different relationship needs there. So that's the gist. Encourage you to do that because that's where this will start to make sense. If you will, the next slide really hits on identifying the 5 love languages. Again, probably not something that you're not familiar with. Words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and then physical touch. If you're like me, words of affirmation, those are some big words. I don't know that I really fully understood what affirmation was until I decided to go get smart and go to college. Affirmation is very important to a lot of people. It feels very good to know that you did good. Quality time, just think about it from a perspective of a young couple. The husband or the wife is gone all day to work and the other one is at home raising a baby for the first time. How important do you think quality time is going to be to that couple? I think it's going to be high on the charts. Receiving gifts, acts of service, and then physical touch. A lot of times some of the young soldiers like the physical touch, but don't forget physical touch is just as important when you're sitting in the car. Like in my case, I may have my hand resting on the shifter, but I think my wife's love language is physical touch because within 2 minutes, she's got my hand on that gear shifter and she's holding my hand. And I have a choice to make. I can either pull my hand away or I can let it be and actually hold her hand. And if you find yourself in that situation, I challenge you to test yourself, see what happens when you don't pull your hand away and actually grab her hand or his hand and just spend that moment connecting with them. I'm going to shift gears real quick and I'm going to hand it to Brian.
And basically what Herb is saying is those are like bids for connection. Those are opportunities for you as a couple or maybe with a child to connect. So when Herb's wife reaches over and grabs his hand, she's saying, I want to be close to you. I want to be connected to you. I love you. So her love language is physical touch. And this strictly is physical touch. It's not having to do with sexual touch. Some people get that confused. That's a different area that we're not covering today, but it's physical touch. So it's hugs, it's proximity, it's hand holding, it's, arm around the shoulder, around the waist. So again, but whatever the love language that's being expressed, it's a way of connecting to the other. So and so yeah, if you're not aware of your partner's love language, and if it is their love language is touch, and they're reaching out to touch your hand, and neither of you are aware of this, and you pull your hand back, like, what are you doing? Like, don't grab my hand. I'm at the commissary. I'm in uniform. Don't touch my hand. We're not supposed to do that. You could kind of do some damage there. And so it's important that we know these things so that we can enhance our connection and build toward, to build great relationships with each other. So, okay.
All right. If you jump down to the next slide just simply says the third big idea before we really hit the ground running with words of affirmation is how we express loving behavior. Again, that behavior word is not necessarily how our spouse wants to receive it. So if I really like words of affirmation and my wife really likes quality time, and we don't know each other's love language, we're creating a moment where there might be some friction allowed into our relationship. At some point in time in that relationship, one of us is going to feel a little left out. It's not always about not feeling left out. It's just the nature of things. If Herb really likes affirmation, but never ever hears it, there's a greater risk of him beginning to doubt himself and wonder if he's doing anything good. But at the same time, if my wife really likes quality time and I'm always so busy doing the you know what thing on the phone, whatever that might be, Facebook, playing games, responding to texts, whatever that is, how connected are we to our spouse? What would it be like for us just to put the phone down for a minute and move over closer to our spouse that likes quality time? My money's on that person's going to really notice it and maybe even be shocked at what you're doing. Challenge is just experiment with that. Take the quiz, find out what it is, and challenge yourself to do something different because your love language may not be the same as their love language.
Yeah, and also just on that, just be aware that sometimes, and I know we're going to go through all this here in a second, but if your partner's love language is affirmation and you don't know that, and you do notice when they get positive feedback from people that it kind of lights them up, they enjoy that, it's does something for them, and yet you're like, oh, that's stupid, I shouldn't have to, what, people don't need praise. So the other part of this and this big idea is not poo-pooing or diminishing or devaluing any love language. It's learning all these love languages. How are they at work in your life, in your relationships, in the home, and not diminishing, like, well, I told you I love you once, so why do I need to keep saying it all over and over and saying positive things to you? Well, maybe if we did that, it would create more connection and more positive feelings and increase our relationships resiliency. So anyways, just a little thought on that.
No, I think it's good. And the one thing that comes to mind for me is I know in the military, we tend to be very mission focused. So when do we make our spouse our mission? When do we invest in creating that, if you will, that op board that says, I'm going to intentionally hold her hand because she's important or he's important to me. And then creating that battle plan to make sure our loved one just knows beyond a shadow of a doubt. The next slide, if you want to change it, really makes it simple for me. I grew up in Kansas, so I like things simple. Your emotional love language and the language of your spouse may be as different as German from English. No matter how hard you try to express love in English, if your spouse only understands German, you will never understand how to love each other. Now, I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to be stationed in Germany. I've had the opportunity to go over there twice. And for me, that's been kind of neat because my last name is very German. But I have to confess, I don't know a lick of German, even after 2 times of being over there. But anybody that was German thought I knew everything about the language of German language. So they would come up to me and start talking it, and I just looked at them. Well, what this quote is saying is that's like when we don't know our partner's love language. We have to learn that language to create an effective communication pattern so that we feed each other and we grow together as one. Again, it's that idea of 2 leaning into each other and becoming one. So the first, sorry, my computer beeped. You probably all saw me looking around. The first words of affirmation is the first love language. We're moving pretty quick through this stuff, but again, it's an overview. And what I would encourage you to do if you haven't read the book is reach out to your unit chaplain, or feel free to even find me on Global or anything, or Brian, and we have some books that we can get in your hands, okay? But the first language, love language that we're going to talk is words of affirmation. And you can see it pretty well defined there. Actions don't always speak louder than words. If this is your love language, unsolicited compliments mean the world to you. I know that when I go home, so if you haven't figured it out yet, I like words of affirmation. I like to know I do good. I like to not tell people I like to know I do good. So when I get a compliment, I'm a rock star, apparently. But at least that's what I tell myself. But those compliments just send me to the moon and back. And I know that's kind of a cheesy phrase, but that's when you speak somebody's love language, essentially that's what happens. Those butterflies come back, that connection, those reminiscing moments of, you get me. That's why we're together. You actually take the time to understand the intricate stuff about me that I don't even understand about myself. And for me, that's words of affirmation. When I get praise, I feel happy. Let's put it that way. So you can see the rest of the quote there. Next slide from Mark Twain says, I can live for 2 months on a good compliment. Maybe I might be a Mark Twain fan. I don't know. I don't know that I needed him to tell me that. I think that's just me right there. I don't know about you, Brian. Are you a words of affirmation guy?
No, but my wife is, and so whenever we were dating and then eventually engaged, and I got to know her family really well. Her dad is such a positive individual, like just constantly very positive, very and really spoke her love language. I don't even know if she knew. I don't think they knew this stuff, almost 30 years ago. But but when we got married, I just kind of felt like, gosh, I'm not this praise guy. I came from a very kind of cold German home, Lutheran background. There's some joking going on there, of course, but not everyone who's German or Lutheran are cold people. But in our family, that was kind of the running joke and the running story is that we have ice in our veins, and we don't say we love you. Well, in our particular family, we said we love you, but my dad didn't really live in a home like that. So so I didn't hear a whole lot of praise as a kid. And so I married this woman whose father just heaped praise on her. Well, when we did this for real and took the love languages test, her number one thing is words of affirmation. So the next slide that I know we're going to go to, if we can go ahead and go to it, sincere appreciation, and I was thinking of sincere words. So when we express affirmation, when I'm trying to speak my wife's love language, it's got to be sincere. It can't just be good job, sweetheart, But it's like, hey, thank you so much. What you do is awesome, So when I do that, and I have to come out of myself, because again, that's not where I came from. I didn't learn that growing up. I didn't experience that growing up. We were very kind of, we weren't warm like that. And so when you speak the other's love language, you do have to come out of your shell. You have to get uncomfortable with some things that maybe you haven't had to experience before. So as we've been married nearly 30 years, we're at 28 years right now. So as life has gone on, it's become more common for me and more easier to be sincere and give sincere compliments to her and praise and words and genuine words of affirmation, not just, being sincere. And so I know she knows when I say things to her, I do mean it. But so sincere words. And sometimes, just to flip this a little bit, sometimes when we get into arguments and we can use, once we know these love languages, we can sometimes weaponize them. So watch yourself, and maybe in your life, a love language is being weaponized to where, well, oh, you did a good job, and I'm kind of being facetious and not genuine. So there are ways to, once we learn these things, to be genuine, to be sincere. I guess I'm keying off the word sincere there. So
No,
sorry for the little soapbox moment there. So
no, I think what you're getting at, Brian, is very powerful. If you jump to the next slide, even it hits the verbal. And one of the things that I remember most is that when I deployed for the first time, one of the challenges was with getting soldiers that were forward to take the time to write something down. So that really feeds the words of affirmation. That reminds their spouse at home that, hey, I'm not forgotten. While they're picking up all the stuff that they don't normally pick up for the first time in their life, to see a note, not just to hear it, but to see a note written on a napkin from the defect saying, here I sat, wishing it was with you, carries a sincere connection there. So I challenge you, if you haven't written your spouse the old love note like you used to maybe when you were dating, or if you've never done it before, I challenge you to step into that and put some thought into it. It's not just the annual birthday card where you say, love you, babe, can't wait for more. It's how do you make me feel? So step into connecting with them and challenge yourself with it. So that's the idea of words of affirmation. You can see on the next slide one of my favorite verses, mainly because I'm a words of affirmation addict. Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Just even reading that gets me excited and gets me waiting on the compliment. Not that you all need a compliment. I just love that when my spouse does that. Words of affirmation, the next quote is again simple. I am not suggesting verbal flattery. Okay, that's key there. It's not that fake or that false motivation to get what you want. So he's not suggesting verbal flattery in order to get your spouse to do something you want. So one of the running jokes my wife and I have that we have to be careful with sometimes is she will go and want to get something new. And I will counter that with saying, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get this since you're getting that. And so we get into this dialogue that we start competing with each other. That's kind of what's going on with words of affirmation. Don't use it, much like what Brian was said, to get what you want, because you're not really doing it for your spouse, and your spouse probably knows you well enough that they're going to see right through your false attempt. So kind of keep that in mind. And again, the next slide just is kind of another verbalization or another reminder. It's that sincere appreciation. Okay. Words of affirmation need to be sincere. It's when you do something out of the ordinary and say, you know what, you just really made my day. Or you know what, babe, that dinner was through the roof. You can make that every day I come home. But if they're into physical touch, it's grabbing their hand, pulling them into you and saying, that was fabulous. And they may even get all giddy on you and not know how to respond, okay?
And just on that little note there, Herb, when you do these tests, especially, it's been a while since I did the one online, but I think they kind of grade out so that you can kind of see which one is, usually you have one dominant love language and maybe one that's pretty close by to the other. So usually, you're strong in 1 and 2, like you have a 1 and 2 love language. So so it's not just learning just one of your partner or about yourself, but it's also learning what's the second one. Sometimes they can all be fairly close together.
Yeah.
And so it's learning how to express those different languages at different times in different places and be sincere. So I know we're kind of maybe jumping ahead there, but
no, you're good.
All right.
So a lot of the next couple of slides are going to seem to be very repetitive, but words of affirmation, when done right, carry with them a lot of weight, especially if you know your spouse. If you jump even to the next slide, it says we must first learn what is important to our spouse. You can't do it to get what you want. You're doing it because, going back to how we understand love, We do it because we love them and we want what we have with them to grow and to go into the future. So it's kind of a grow and go move. Next slide covers pretty much the same stuff. Verbal appreciation, encouraging words, kind words. It's just letting them know they've done good and that what they've done, it's not about what they did, but it's about what it means to you. Okay. Each one of these next few slides kind of build on each other. So if you want to kind of click all the way to the last one that has all 5 bullets on there. Verbal appreciation, encouraging words, kind words, humble words, indirect affirming words. I don't want to unpack that one with you. I want you to set with that one. If you're a words of affirmation person that needs words of affirmation, what would your spouse do that would be an indirect affirming word? Is it when they talk how great you are to their friend? I don't know. What is it? What would make your day that would be seen as affirmation? Does that make sense, Brian?
Oh, absolutely. And I can really relate to this one since we're on on affirmation, because so that's my wife's love language, and so I learned over the course of our relationship and marriage that sharing with my family when my wife's on the line or we're FaceTiming that hey, Angie is just knocking out of the park doing this for our family, or she took on this responsibility in the church, or whatever it might be. Just that indirect affirmation, so that others, she knows that I care about that, and it's important to me that I would share with my parents, because I know my parents would enjoy knowing that as well. So and usually that has another feedback, more feedback coming from someone else. So, or even with her own family over the years, whenever we would be together for gatherings, I would say, hey, do you know what your daughter did? And I would share that with them, and they would just be thrilled, especially my wife's dad. He would just go nuts, and he would just dump even more affirmation on her. So it was like the affirmation fest. So
yeah. If we're going to do kind of a hard shift, we're going to look at quality time. Okay. Again, this is just a quick overview of words of affirmation. We spent a lot of time on it, but the next one is quality time. So if you jump to the quote on the next slide, I think we need to think about this as military professionals sometimes. Okay. He is a good provider, but he doesn't spend any time with me. What good is the house and the recreational vehicle and all the other things if we don't ever enjoy them together? I know, as I've been transparent with you, words of affirmation are important to me. Tomorrow, my wife's actually going to be on here when we do this again tomorrow. And hers is quality time. It's very easy for me to pull away from her, not because I don't love her, but it's just very easy for me to forget that she needs quality time. And we need to be intentional, especially, the soldier that's in the relationship, if you will, or the person that's in the relationship that's very busy. We need to be intentional about shutting that off and connecting with our spouse, especially if they need quality time or if that speaks volumes to them. Because what they do, in my case, what my wife keeps running for me when I have to go to a training or go deploy or things like that, I couldn't do it from where I'm located. So what she's doing is of great value to us as we look at tomorrow together. So being willing to sit down with our spouse is extremely important, especially if that's quality time. It's very hard. I know this might be a soapbox issue for me, but it's very hard to put the phone on vibrator, to even turn it off, or to pull yourself away from it for 30 minutes and just go for a walk with the dog, if you will, and just connect, spend that time, hear how their day was, and invest in the future with the person that you want to go into the future with. Brian, any thoughts on quality time there, man?
Yeah, I think the next one we're heading towards, which is has undivided attention, and just kind of dovetail on what you were saying there, that and you kind of provided a great image a while ago, Herb, and that is you could have one couple, their love language, his love language could be touch. So envision them sitting on the couch after hours in the evening time, and he's sitting there on the couch looking at his phone, and hers is quality time. And if he's, you know, his is touch, sitting close, maybe even an arm around her with the phone in one hand, if he's not aware of her love language is quality time, she's going to feel like this is just wasted time. He's looking at his phone. He doesn't care about me, and I really don't want to sit close to him. So that undivided attention. So putting the phone down, putting distractions away, and just looking and listening and interacting. So it's being present. It's being present and not allowing even the stuff that happened during the day to kind of pull you away from that moment. So undivided attention, because that lets them know, hey, I must be important because you put the phone down, or you didn't answer that call right away. Your battle buddy called you that wants to go fishing, and you didn't answer right away and leave me here on the couch. So
yeah, and just kind of perusing through the slides there, the next one even just says for discussion, it says make a list of things that you think you would do to spend quality time together. That's kind of homework, or that's kind of an experiment, if you will. Catch your loved one and say, what can we do that would equal quality time to you, especially if that's their love language. Even if it's not, I would encourage you to try that and see where your relationship goes. It does sound somewhat silly, even as I hear myself say this from time to time, but some of my wife's and my best quality time is we have a dog that we always walk. Now, Washington does some unique things to whether we walk in the light or whether we walk in the dark by the time I get home. But sometimes it's just important to stop everything, eat dinner, whatever the case may be, and go for a walk with the dog, because nothing's there to distract us. The dog is well behaved, and it's just her and I. Where would your relationship go if you took time to invest in one another like that? Not everybody wants a dog, I got it. But what activity could you do together? So just ponder that, mull that over a little bit. And then if you want, jump to about 3 slides ahead. It's got quality time, and it just breaks it down. It says undivided attention, quality conversation, importance of listening. I like the order here because sometimes we can listen. I don't know about you, Brian, but sometimes we can listen mainly for the other person to shut up so that we can tell them how wrong they are. Guys, that doesn't go well in quality time because the other person can really pick up on that. So make sure you're attentively hearing what the other one's saying. And this is important, the order, because the very third bullet is the importance of listening. Because if they like quality time and you're trying to have a conversation and all you do is say, no, you're wrong, that's not right, here's what right looks like, are you really hearing what they're saying, or are you just trying to become the stronger person and rule the conversation? Connect with them through conversation. Make sure it's an impactful conversation, and make sure you're listening. Sometimes it's hard. Some of us aren't the greatest listeners in the world. But again, another experiment. Test that and see. If your spouse loves quality time, try some reflective listening or some active listening, whichever way you want to call that, and say, wow, so today was really rough for you, it sounds like. How did you manage all of that? And just be ready to continue the conversation, because I think you'll be surprised at the outcome of that. Brian, you got any thoughts on?
Yeah, and this, going back to that, the love tank, or some people call it the love bank that's mentioned at the very beginning of this. I mean, this is all about investment. So you may think, oh man, why does my spouse have to have quality time? That's the one I don't want to do. And but look at it as a way to invest in the other. And so the importance of listening. You're like, oh man, I gotta listen. Like, yeah, that's right. You gotta listen. You're in this. If you're in it for the long haul, you'll find a way to be genuine, be present, and listen. And not just listen to not say anything, but to as Herb said a second ago, active listening. Reflective listening. Hey, well, tell me more about that. What do you mean by that? I'd like to know. Again, it is being part of the conversation, asking a question here or there, or even reflecting back and like, wow, that's really powerful what you just shared with me, or I never thought of that before. but not just letting that person go off on a monologue, but making it a dialogue, and that you are engaged in the conversation, and that will show that you are invested in quality time.
Absolutely. Next slide is a powerful quote. Many of us are trained to analyze problems and create solutions. I think that's probably true in the military. I think that's just how we do business. And I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek. How do we do that in our relationships? Because you see, the quote goes on, says, we forget that marriage is a relationship, not a project to be completed or a problem to solve. Sometimes I liken this, bash my own maleness for a minute. I call it a male disease or a man disease, because by and large, I've talked to a lot of guys that think their job is to fix it for their spouse. But really what the other person may be looking for is just a valuable, a quality type conversation. So shut the fix it off and be present and just hear what's being said. And if you're not sure if she's needing you to do something, ask the question. Or if he's needing you to do something, ask the question. Say, what can I do to help you with that? Don't be afraid to step into the conversation. Again, the objective is not you continue here and the other person continue here. It's to lean into each other, to come together as a unit that goes into tomorrow different than ever before. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. And then if you jump ahead, let's jump down to about 4 more slides where there's 5 bullets under quality time. We've covered a couple of those already. The last 2 are learning to talk and quality activities. I told you my thing, I don't know if Brian does things for quality time or not, but my thing for my wife and I is walking the dog, and it makes me grin every time I tell people that. It's just so easy to get distracted by things when you're at home and you got the phone or you got the TV on, or you just got so many things you could do. You could go do the dishes, you could take the trash out. And when we get lost in all of that, how invested are we in our spouse? So for me, what are those activities?
So yeah, this is my wife's second most love language, and so there's times I'll get a text during the day like, "Hey, I want to go to South Hill Mall." We live over near Puyallup, and I'm like, "Oh man, it's been a long day. I've been talking to people all day. I don't want to go to Puyallup Mall. Come on now." And I'm like, oh, "Shut up, Brian. This is not about you." And so sometimes, whenever my wife says something like that, I pick up. I'm like, no, I think what she's saying to me, she wants to spend time with me. So even though it may be cold at night and it's dark at night, we'll go out for, get home about 6 o'clock, and we have dinner, and then maybe we'll go for a walk, or we'll go go to Walmart, make a Walmart run, and it's not necessarily about going to Walmart. It's not necessarily about going to walk, like Herb said a while ago. It's about spending time together. So when your spouse says stuff like that to you, maybe have that awareness now, like maybe that's their love language if they haven't taken the test. Quality time. They want to go do something. I don't feel like doing it. I'm tired. I did PT early this morning, or I had to be at my workstation early this morning. Okay, yeah, get out and do something and see what happens.
Right. Thanks, Brian. The next slide we'll jump into is receiving gifts. It's just kind of an overview there. Very next one hits receiving gifts. Take just a second and read over that. This is the fun part. I wish we could do the open mic, but I think we'll bog down the system. But I think this one particular gift or love language can challenge many people. So I'll give you just a couple more seconds to read that. For me, it's that second sentence, if you will. If you read it there, it says, if you speak this language, the perfect gift or gesture shows that you are known, you are cared for, and you are prized above whatever was sacrificed to bring that gift to you. So you are known and you are cherished above all. Now, it's not, as you can see, about materialism. Oh my goodness, they want another car. Oh, they want a bigger TV. That's a little bit different than receiving gifts. I'm sure they might greatly receive that if they keep talking about it, or you can bring it to my house. I would take either one of those. But the idea behind it is not that. The next slide says, it's a quote, it says, "You must be thinking of someone to give them a gift. The gift itself is a symbol of that thought." So you have to put your mind into it. And it's about you thinking, man, this could really communicate something about how I feel to my spouse. And it's not always about buying something. They cover, something found, something that's sentimental. I'm kind of wondering out loud here, but I kind of wonder if your spouse likes to receive gifts and it's somewhat challenging for you, that if you went back to that first slide again that deals with reminiscing, if she might or he might perceive that as a gift. And you talk about those early days when both of you had butterflies going crazy and just connecting, and that other person, your spouse who likes receiving gifts, just got one of the biggest gifts, reminded of how you feel about her or him in that moment. I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering about that one. If you feel like it, try it out and see what happens. Next slide says, remember the power behind these tokens is their symbolism. It's about their symbolism. That wedding band, for instance, is a tangible reminder of your love and commitment to her. When was the last time you guys sat hand in hand and looked at each other's rings and talked about that day? When was the last time that maybe, if you've been married for a minute, that, I don't know, maybe updated it or took it into the shop and made sure, those big old diamonds that were on it in the day are solidly attached without her saying, hey, this is getting wobbly. Okay. When was the last time you did something like that memorialized that special day and made her feel value because you were going above and beyond and giving her something that she might not even, or he might not have been asking for? Brian, any thoughts on gifts, man?
Yeah, you'll know if you're living with someone who likes to receive gifts, because if it's something that was made, or maybe a child brought and gave it to your partner, your spouse, and they keep that forever on their nightstand or on their desk at work, and it's collecting dust because it just means something. That you live with someone who likes to receive gifts. They just like that expression of love that it took, and the energy it took to create that thoughtful symbol of love. So yeah, when you go back to your place tonight and look around, and if you may be living with a gift receiver, if you see things that are kind of ancient and are still on a end table or on the wall.
All right, thanks. And then kind of jumping 2 slides ahead is another quote that I guess maybe challenges me somewhat. It says, if your spouse's primary love language is receiving gifts, you can become a proficient giver. In fact, it is one of the easiest love languages to learn. Where that challenged me somewhat is, don't take this as a buy. It still goes back to, why are you giving that gift? It's the symbolism associated. It's the connecting your mind with why you're doing what you're doing, and allowing your spouse to see that you took the time to connect and understood that this might be important to them, and showing them in the gift that they're number one. Okay, so moving forward, you can see the next slide that has a quote. It's about 3 forward. Physical presence in the time of crisis is the most powerful gift you can give if your spouse's primary love language is receiving gifts. I don't know about you, Brian, but that's a conflict for me, because does she like quality time or does she like receiving gifts? And at the end of the day, what matters? Matters most is you being willing to connect with her. So if she calls it gifts and you might define it as quality time, do it again, because your relationship is going somewhere that it hasn't gone before. Don't get in a squabble over how you define it. Physical presence in the time of crisis is the most powerful gift you can give if your spouse's primary love language is receiving gifts. And I think we could flesh this out further if we had time. If you look at with what's going on with COVID and et cetera, and some of our spouses have had to stay home and take care of the kiddos and just be inundated. Some of them may not have been even able to continue working because of the demands with no school and et cetera, and just really conflicted their normal battle rhythm. Your physical presence with them during a time of crisis is one of the best things you can do that will feed your language, feed your relationship, and take it into tomorrow than you could ever imagine. So make sure you're listening to your loved one if you're going through a situation that's similar to that, and make sure you're being intentional about connecting. If you jump to the next slide, it says write down 5 gifts that have been especially meaningful to you. So this is more about you if you like receiving gifts, and share them with each other. We don't, obviously with how we're doing this, that's not possible to do, but what are those gifts? And then I challenge you to, if your spouse is good at giving you gifts, to go back to that and say, you know what, when you gave me this, it meant the world to me. And just trying to connect, because you never know, they may be big on words of affirmation, and what does that do for them? Recognizing the gift, and they're getting reassured that they did something right. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, and on the gift giving, when you think, oh man, I gotta give my spouse likes gifts, and that's their love language. Oh man, why do I have to have that one? Again, look at it as that investment. How are you going to express yourself in investing in the other? And maybe I'm just not very creative. All right, well, that's something you can learn. I mean, that's a skill you can learn. And again, the sincerity as well. Not like just going to. Years ago, I worked on a pipeline for a pipeline company my dad worked for, and I worked with this mechanic that did some repair work on these engines on the pipeline. And he was one of the most difficult people to work with, I was told. And I was a young 20-year-old, and worked with this guy for like several summers during my college years. And one of the things he gave me when I was leaving and going off of my last year in college, he gave me this knife, and it was a pocket knife, and he just took it and threw it on the table and he said some cuss words at me and said there, take that. And but it was a gift he gave me, and of course I didn't know anything about love languages, but don't be like that when you give a gift. Like here's a gift for you, but you're giving it, like you don't even have to say words. You just leave it somewhere, place it somewhere, give it to them, wherever you need to do. You don't even have to say words. Okay, it's just like it's an action. You just do it. So you can offer words, but it's not always necessary. So like the guy I was telling you about, he had a hard time with words, and he just threw this thing on the table and handed it to me with some swear words. But you don't have to have words. You can just easily just be thoughtful and considerate and do something to give the gift that's not requiring you be Shakespeare.
Yeah, that's good. We're gonna jump to the last 2. Okay, so we're moving through this pretty quick. A lot of this is us talking at you. Where there's money made is when we can discuss this more. So before we jump to active service, if you find yourself wanting to flush this out a little bit more, you can find both Brian Osborne and my name under the global is Herbert Lemke. You can find both of us on there.
And I'm Roger B. Osborne. So my Army name is ROGER, Roger.B. Osborne 2. So.
But we both would be open to share, even with phone call, break this out a little bit more with you so we can talk even one-on-one. There's no shame in that. Sometimes once you start understanding, it's kind of like algebra. Once you start understanding the equation, it makes sense, and you'll be surprised at how it helps your relationship be altered. Kind of the system can grow and become something new under that. So anyway, if you'll jump to the next slide, acts of service. This one can be pretty basic, but pretty challenging. For me, before we even look at that definition, feel free to read it, but a lot of times we come into a relationship with family roles, and where we go with acts of service is sometimes we may have grown up with a mom, in my case, that did everything for dad, and dad always worked. So I bring that into a relationship, not saying it's even right. Before I knew much about counseling and human dynamics, I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. And then I started to learn and to grow. And I'll tell you what, if I'm willing to go in there and do dishes, man, it's a good night in the Lemke household. She's happy, I'm happy. We're enjoying the walk with the dog. Our conversations are good, and we may not even have the TV on. We may actually talk for more than 10 minutes. So when we challenge what we bring into the relationship and are willing to step into some what I'm going to call predefined roles and mix that up a little bit, and our spouse likes acts of service, they're going to notice that. And they're going to be challenged by that, and they're probably going to appreciate that. So kind of take that, kind of keep that in mind as you think what acts of service are. You can see the definition is very simple. Can vacuuming the floors really be an expression of love? Absolutely. Anything you do to ease the burdens or responsibilities weighing on acts of service person will speak volumes. No questions asked. The words he or she most want to hear is, let me do that for you. Laziness, broken commitments, and making more work for them tell speakers of this language their feelings don't matter. I know that I tend to be a snacker, and my wife really prides herself on making sure, roughly when I get home, dinner's pretty close to being done. It's not as a disclaimer, it's not a requirement in the Lemke household, but it is one thing that she just does. And so where I mess up and she doesn't feel appreciated is when I go straight to the pantry and grab a snack because dinner's not done. And she interprets that as I'm unappreciative. But what she's doing for me is kind of an act of service because she's been busy. And it's very important for me to just be excited that she's willing to do that. That's another example of how acts of service can play itself out in the home. The quote on the next slide, it says, what we do for each other before marriage is no indication of what we will do after the marriage. I think we've all heard, I don't know about you, Brian, but the honeymoon's over. The statisticians say 2 weeks after the marriage, it gets real. You find out the toilet paper's rolled the wrong way, or the toothbrushes aren't put where they're supposed to be, or things like that. And we start finding out who each other is when the honeymoon's over. And that's kind of what's going on here with acts of service. That's when it rears its head. The whining and dining is over, I guess, is another thing that I've heard. The next slide says, doing things your spouse would like you to do. I don't know if I like that definition. It's right. That doesn't mean I like it. You seek to please him or her, to express your love for him or her by doing things for him or her. Wow, it almost sounds like it's not about me in the relationship. And that's kind of what it's getting at. It's when we're willing to do whatever we need to do for the betterment of the relationship. You got any thoughts on acts of service, Brian?
Yeah, and again, this is one. Maybe, oh man, why do they have to have acts of service? But and again, this is love languages will stretch your comfort zone, and so if this is your spouse's love language, get uncomfortable. It'll definitely be worth it. And I kind of wonder if your spouse does a lot of the things around the house that maybe you don't like to do, that they might be expressing their love language because that's what they like to do. I don't know. I'm kind of an acts of service. That's one of my probably my second one. So I like when things are done towards me, but I also like to do things too. So I'll often do stuff thinking that I'm going to get love out of doing it. But and so your spouse does a lot of things, and not just because they have to, but because they do. That might be their love language. So maybe, if it is the proverbial take the garbage out and you're just sitting there doing nothing, like, well, maybe taking the garbage out is going to be speaking that acts of service love language to your partner, or whatever it is. So it's proverbial situation, I'm talking about. But so, take a step back, look at it. And, if you want to invest, you want to see change in your relationships, speak their love language. And just a little side note too here, some of us may have a spouse, like, maybe this is new to you today, and you're like, go home and tell your spouse, your partner, hey, I learned this thing about love language. And they're gonna be like, I really don't care about that right now. That may be the situation you're in. And if that is the situation you're in, and maybe what you can do is, do the detective work, figure out what your partner's love language is, and begin to invest in their love language. And they may be like, what are you doing? Like, why are you, what's the change here? What's going wrong? But nothing at all. Just want to express my love to you, and that I love you. And so some of us may be in that kind of situation today. Our partner may not be open to this idea of love languages, or speaking love languages to each other, or speaking it back, our love language. But if you want to see improvement in your relationship, begin with a simple positive change. If you think about our lives, we sometimes live in circularity, or just kind of a rut almost, and we just kind of keep in the same pattern. And if you do one little change like this, it can disrupt this pattern of sameness, this ordinary stuff that we experience, that we may be like, oh, we just got to get out of this rut. So one little change, speaking your partner's love language, not expecting to get anything back, all right, just not expecting to get anything back, but just simple act of service, a gift or whatever it is, can have the potential to disrupt that system that's going around and around and around. Like, whoa, what's going on here? Why did he or she do that to me? What's going on here? So anyways, just a thought.
I think that's good. Acts of service, as you can see, is fluid for some of us and challenging for some of us. And some of that just means that we need to do some internal work on ourselves and see what kind of stereotypes we bring into a relationship. And I think that alone can help you. Why is it that you feel, for example, men can only drive cars and women sit in the passenger seat? Why do you bring that into a relationship? I mean, where is that coming from? Women can drive cars too. So what is the problem? Is it me? Well, in that case, yeah, absolutely, because it says something about you in that moment. So stereotypes can be dangerous, is the moral of my story, in a relationship if you don't unpack them. They almost don't leave room for acts of service if you're too fearful to step into them. And the next couple of slides cover that. Acts of service, there's 2 bullets under it. It's 2 slides forward. It says serving despite stereotypes. So you have to do some internal work. Why is it that I feel that way? Why do I think I have to do that? And just doing some self-reflection. And then serving as a choice to love. Wow, she really likes to do that. So in my case, sometimes I not let her, because that even sounds bad. That's not, it's important for her to do that. And what does that say she feels about me? And it's all of this going back and forth in our relationships. We have to kind of be careful, because it's not that one is greater than the other. Anybody has distinct roles. It is what you guys come together as a couple and talk about and agree upon. And then even as you start to go into a relationship, continuing to challenge yourself with. So maybe right now, work requirements, you're not home much. So she's really invested in you, and it's very important, or he's really invested in you, and they do a lot more at the home than what they used to. Do you notice that? Do you acknowledge that? Do you say, man, you just give me butterflies every time I turn around by the way you take care of me, and that just means so much to me? Are you willing to step into that, or is it just an expected behavior? Challenge you, don't let it be an expected behavior. Speak to what's going on in your home, okay? And then for discussion, the next slide says each of you list some specific acts of service. That really is about the self-reflection, is the way I interpret it. Maybe Brian interprets it differently, but what does your home look like? I can only kind of do that in my house. And my wife and I can unpack that together in a safe environment and decide what it looks like for us. But Brian's probably only going to do that with his spouse, just like that's what you would need to do with yours, and start to unpack how you guys can grow together different than what yesterday looked like, okay? So the last one is physical touch. You have any more thoughts on acts of service? We kind of beat that one up a little bit. So the last one's physical touch, and we're going to kind of wrap it up with this. This one, pay attention to the words under the definition there. It says this language isn't all about the bedroom. A person whose primary language is physical touch is, not surprisingly, very touchy. Hugs, pats on the back, holding hands, and thoughtful touches on the arm, shoulder, or face. They can be all ways to show excitement, concern, care, and love. Physical presence and accessibility are crucial, while neglect or abuse can be unforgivable and destructive. Some people just don't like to be touched. We have to figure that out, you know, or maybe it's not that they don't like to be touched, but maybe they don't want to be, maybe they don't like their hand held, but just coming up behind them and patting them on the back after rubbing their back after they've had a hard day. I don't know, maybe they like that. It's being willing to explore that, okay? But keep in mind, like he says up front, it's not about the bedroom. And Brian, I kind of covered that earlier. It's holding hands while you're driving down the road. It's holding the hands going into the commissary. It's things like that.
Yeah, and this is a really big one. You know, I see one of my former commanders on there, and I remember, you know, like, I'm thinking about like military balls, and you know, military balls they're fun, they're exciting, and so everyone has just been unique and great experiences. But when you go to a ball, and your spouse is their love language is physical touch, and you go off, if you're the service member, and you go off and talk to all your buddies and stuff like that, which is fun, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But if you leave your spouse sitting at the table and their word or their love language is physical touch, it says something to them. And so think about that. You know, when you're with your organization, or if you're at your, you know, if you attend a religious service or a church or something like that, and you show up together, and your partner's love language is physical touch, they may need you to be right there with them during that time. And if you're extroverted and you like to go around and talk to people and see your buds and everybody else out there, you know, that's nothing wrong with that. But just be aware that love language could really be beneficial in that moment. So think about the context you're in, and where that love of physical touch is experienced. And we'll say a lot at a military ball, like, hey, and maybe affirmation is one of your partner's second love language. So you physical touch, you're with them, and affirmation because you're there with your commander and you're introducing your spouse to your commander, or someone that's part of your organization. Hey, this is my spouse. Don't they look great today? Blah, 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 blah. So all that is very important, the context as well.
Yeah, very good. And I think physical touch is very self-explanatory. The challenge is when you may not like it and your spouse does, you're really going to have to step into that and realize the benefit of doing that, okay? So I know we've kind of said that 6 different ways, but be willing to step into it. If you jump to almost one of the last slides, it's called bottom line. It has 2 bullets under it, and it says we need to be other-centered. Anytime you go into a relationship, it's really not about you. And if you're in a relationship right now and you think it is about you, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. It's not. It's about the 2 of you together going into tomorrow. It's the way I like to look at it, okay? And then that second bullet is about love. Love is a choice. Connecting with your spouse, deciding you want to grow old with this person and just go on into the ever after, whatever that might be for some of you out there. Man, that's a journey that will forever impact not you on that journey alone, but the family that's watching that, the kids maybe that are involved in the relationship, and just being willing to reach in and speak that love language to your spouse shows family members maybe what right looks like, shows kids how to have healthy relationships. The impact is absolutely unmeasurable if you're willing to take your eyes off yourself and put them on others. I received a text while we were talking, and I want to kind of wrap things up with this. If you need a synopsis of how to understand the 5 love languages, this is in reference to tacos. So Chep Del Tufo, thank you very much. Words of affirmation when it comes to tacos. This would sound like your tacos are delicious. So you can take tacos out there, but this is a practical application for you, okay? Acts of service. I made you tacos. Receiving gifts. Hey, here's a taco. Quality time. Oh, this is a good one. Let's go out for tacos together. Now, where they go, I don't know. Taco Bell drive-thru right now. I'm not sure. Physical touch. Let me hold you like a taco. So keep in mind, 5 love languages is going to be hardest for you, but if you're willing to do it, it pays off in the end. Brian, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, just think of your relationship, especially with your partner, your spouse, as just do, think of dancing together. And if you do like ballroom classical dancing, not the real close dancing, but just the hand and shoulder type thing. I'm terrible at dancing, but just think of that imagery of there's space between you, and that space between you is your relationship, and that space is where your relationship happens. And so part of how your relationship can happen and can improve is to protect that space, but also to fill it with learning your partner's love language and adding to it and giving to that space, because in that space, your relationship will be dynamic and it will grow. And so try to think of your relationship in terms of being dynamic and needs to be nurtured, needs to grow, and it's not just one dimension like linear. So think about that space and investing in that space. Also, so if you would like to know, or the JBLM Chaplain Family Life Center, I mentioned to you, is at Fort Chaplain's Memorial Chapel at 9120 Transmission Line Road. If you would like to work with one of our counselors, we have a counseling team there. We do couples counseling, individual counseling. We are available and ready to support you Monday through Friday. We do it on appointment. So if you would like to talk about improving your marriage or work one-on-one, feel free to call me at our center at 253-967-1723. That is 253-967-1723. Or you can email me at roger.b, as in bravo.osborne2.mil. Again, roger.b.osborne2.mil. And so we'll be glad to call you or talk and see how our center can support you. All right.
And if just kind of on a side note, if you and some of your friends want to go through 5 love languages at some time in depth, we'll keep the numbers low. Reach out to us. Maybe we could set up some kind of small group and explore this further. Really, what you got today was an absolute overview. So we blew through a lot of things. There's definitely room to unpack more. But if you take the time and you want to read the book, or you need the book, come up on the net, email Brian. My email is pretty simple as well. It's herbert.a.lemke.mil@mail.mil. And do not hesitate to reach out to us, because we want to be an asset for you guys as you take your relationship into tomorrow. So I want to thank you up front for tolerating us with some technical difficulties as I learned to navigate this. And then we'll be back on tomorrow. I actually have my spouse tomorrow that will take part in that group tomorrow. So I appreciate you, and just strongly encourage you, continue to invest in your spouse, okay? With that, I will sign out.